Go for it.
All right. Thank you so much. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for making time. Those of you who are over in Asia, starting your day with us here today. And I'll just quickly introduce myself, but I'm here to get into the subject matter and leave some time for questions at the end. My name is Paul Burani. I'm based in New York, founder and CRO of Mission Flywheel, which is a revenue strategy consulting partner to social enterprises, companies much like you that are in a growth stage and looking to expand, looking to break into the US marketplace. My background primarily in media and advertising. I founded a digital media agency called ClickSharp back in 2007. Guided it to exit, spent some time at the acquiring agency, and that turned into a number of years at Google, running partnerships with global automakers, doing some internal strategy work, and ultimately pivoted into EdTech, where I really kind of saw a new side of true mission-driven work, using education as a way to connect underserved populations with stable middle-class careers in technology. And so I'm really putting it all together, taking all of the skills from running marketing and sales teams over many years, working with big brands, big global advertisers, and then also applying that to mission-driven organizations with a desire to create social impact in addition to their economic returns. So that's a little bit about me and my company. I've read a little bit about you and your companies, but I'm eager to dive in. And I will just start sharing my slides. If anyone cannot see them, somebody please just let me know. Okay, so we're here to talk about investor prospecting. And really, the discussion is a little broader than simply investor prospecting. I think what we want to really do here is talk about what are the best ways to really plan an approach into this United States market. You've founded your company, you've built some momentum, you have built up the confidence now to expand beyond Singapore and beyond the APAC region. We're excited to have you here in the US. And I want to talk about the investor landscape as well as some other nuances to the culture, to the operating environment, the business environment, and so on. And so really, I want to focus on two objectives. Number one is to identify the nuances of this market and how it might differ from what you're used to. But I also want to make sure that you get value from today's conversation. So where I can, I'll provide insights from my own experience. I'll provide some recommendations, things you can do to take action, and lots of resources of tools that you can consult, organizations you can contact, because the truth is, you're all going to have probably a slightly different profile for what you're trying to do in the United States and how you're going to go about it. Your businesses are different. It's hard to have a one-size-fits-all conversation. And so I'm hoping that everybody comes away with something, and we can at least make this a starting point for the conversation. Now, using an analogy that I think is globally relevant, I wanted to make today's argument something that we can sort of make it relatable. And so I decided we would use the sport of football as our analogy here. And we're going to look at it in three ways. There is the playing field, the pitch as it's called. We have the rules that we follow, and we have the players on the field. And so we're going to use these three sort of analogies to speak of what it means to expand into the United States. So we'll go through them one by one, starting with the playing field. So when we think about the playing field, we're going to look at it in a few ways. The first is the actual US market, the place where our future customers reside. And we're going to look at that in the sense of it's a big marketplace. It's a fragmented marketplace, very diverse. The United States has a very unique history. And there are a lot of cultural differences. You don't even have to go very long distances to start to see the changes in the people and the places and things that make up the United States. And this lends itself to a very busy, competitive profile as well. Now, at the same time, we also have the investor landscape. These aren't your customers, these are your investors. They want something different from you, but the truth is, both of them are so important. You have a lot of options at your disposal among the investment landscape. But we're also going to talk a little bit about risk tolerance as a specific nuance of this market. So that's an overview of the playing field analogy. And let's get into some of these points that I just made. From a size and diversity perspective, really what I want to drive home is that there is no one America. I've had the benefit, I've grown up here in the United States, but I've had the benefit of living in other cultures. I was born in Italy, I've lived in Germany and Denmark. I've had exchange programs, give me exposure to cultures from all over the world, worked in other countries. And I'm always amazed that people, when they find out that I come from the US, will always ask, all right, so what does the typical American think about this or that? How do they respond to this or that? And I'm always very quick to say there is no typical American. It just doesn't exist. And what that means is you'll never find a single customer archetype. There's a wide range of demographics and preferences and behaviors. We'll get into this in some detail, but what it means is you want to think about a national approach, top down, where in the early days, adapting to the US marketplace, you may not have the ability to narrowcast to specific regions or specific localities, but there is also a need to have some balance. And maybe that means selecting some test markets to do a bottom up complement. And so, some resources that you should consider as you think about this. In the research community, Pew Research really is, in my mind, the gold standard for research on Americans' habits, on Americans' tendencies, beliefs, attitudes, cultural norms, their values. This is not only in a business context. Pew Research Center really covers a lot of the psychology underlying our behavior in and outside of a business context. Statista is one that I chose because it offers a lot of free research, as you probably know. Paying for syndicated or custom market research can get very expensive. Statista is a way around that. They've chosen to corner the market by offering, some, more lightweight solutions for companies that need intelligence without the depth of some of their other competitors that are providing to the marketplace. And finally, this last one here, maybe you're not familiar with. Hofstede Insights is actually it's a think tank named after a Dutch researcher by the name of Geert Hofstede, who studied the cultural differences between different countries and applied them largely to a business context. There's a very nice website where there are some tools that are very useful. If you were to compare, for example, Singapore and the United States, you can get a very quick comparison on a number of dimensions that Hofstede is famous for having studied for many, many years. So these are some ways to think about the size and diversity of the US market. Now, going one level deeper and thinking about some of this nuance. One thing that is quite common in many Asian cultures is the formality and the hierarchy that comes with interpersonal communication. In the US, get rid of it. You're going to be casual and you're going to be direct. It's okay to be laid back. It's okay to show your personal side, smile, tell stories, relate to people, and create a real sense of personal connection. The United States is an individualist culture. And what that really means, the way that this manifests, is that there is, differently from collectivist societies, in an individualist society, there's a lot of emphasis on how much you as an individual can achieve. It's part of why we have such a vibrant entrepreneurial culture, because the entrepreneurial culture puts a founder or a small number of founders at the center of the world, and everything revolves around them. Now, That doesn't mean that we don't value teamwork and we don't value community and some of these other sort of collectivist priorities. But I want you to think about it in terms of product and in terms of marketing. From a product point of view, a lot of you I know are software companies. You're offering solutions. You're offering, maybe cloud-based services. You're offering financial services to consumers. Think about this individualist lens to look through all of the features, all the user experience that's baked into that product. And also think about it in terms of marketing, because when you're writing copy for an advertisement or when you're thinking about targeting a particular consumer, if you really get into their heads, you're going to connect with them on a level that will make these strategies more impactful. Regionality is something we talked about on the last slide, and it's very hard to break down geography. The United States is an enormous country, both in terms of land mass as well as population, well over 330 million people. And so just to give you a framework for how to think about it, the types of cultures that you see residing along the east and west coast of the United States are very different from what you find in the heartland, what we think of as the area in between the coasts. There are different preferences, different priorities, different political attitudes, and so on. The same is true in urban environments versus suburban, rural environments where attitudes will differ a little bit. And so for all of these reasons, I'm driving home the point that we have to always remember there's going to be, like a matrix of all of the different permutations. Remember that the only true Americans are Native Americans, who are actually quite small in number in American society. We have a collection of immigrants that has come here over the period of hundreds of years. And so our cultural origins all trace back to other countries, but they all have a more recent inflection that comes from being part of the American experiment. Without getting political, I will be very quick to point out it's an experiment that has its pros and cons, it has its flaws, but there's no denying its commercial upside as you try to enter this market. The last point I'll make, when you're talking in this culture and you're talking about the value you will bring to a customer, to an investor, they want you to get to the point. It goes back to the first bullet about formality and hierarchy. Just get on with it. You can make your contextual point, you can set up your argument, but don't spend a lot of time building up to it, because they want you to get to the point, and if they have questions, they will ask. This is an important cultural imperative to be mindful of. Now, where do you go to learn cultural nuances? That's a very hard question to answer. I would say the best thing you could do is just live and work in this society for a period of time and get used to it. But if you're a busy entrepreneur, you've got a lot of different priorities. What I would say is experiment with some in-person networking and community. A meetup is a site. It's not an American site. It's got a global reach, but Meetup is one of the best I've seen in creating community around topics of relevance to people. It's not always about business. It could be about sports. It could be about cooking. It could be about travel. But it's a great way to pick up on some of the cultural nuances and observe them firsthand. Not only absorb them from what you see in other people, but share a bit of yourself and watch people respond. That's a great way to accelerate your understanding of this marketplace. The last piece on the playing field is competition. And I want to point out that distinctive value propositions go a long way in the US. Now, this might seem obvious. Our value proposition is basically an answer to the question, why should I care about your business? Why are you better than the next one or the last one? And it stands to reason that you would want to differentiate yourself. But in this super individualistic society, in this society where there are so many entrepreneurs, they are well funded, they are well resourced, and they have tremendous amount of momentum, it's all the more important to really define that value proposition write it down, play it back to other people, get their feedback, optimize it. Even the difference of a word here and a word there really counts for a lot. And consider alternatives to entering the market directly, because the competitive picture is not just about standing out with your value prop. It's also about what mechanisms are you using to give yourself the best odds of breaking into the market, achieving traction, customer growth, getting into attention from investors, ultimately turning a profit, going from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 100. And entering the market directly, opening your business and saying, we're here, come on in, is just one way to do it. So these are many models that are not unique to the United States market, from licensing and franchising to joint ventures, strategic alliances, even outsourcing parts of your company, like a distribution agreement to generate sales activity, or contract manufacturing to outsource part of your supply chain. These are ways that you can accelerate the process, and they're not necessarily unique to the United States, but there are resources here that can give you a leg up. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a lot of research. It can give you access to experts, volunteers who consult on these topics, and can give you some perspective on which alternatives maybe make the most sense for your business. I would also recommend, from the academic community, Harvard Business Review is a great source of case studies. American companies trying to do, in many respects, the same things you're trying to do, and experimenting with some of these mechanisms to actually enter and penetrate a market. So these are some good resources for you to consider as you think about the playing field. Now, the investor landscape, we talked about customer growth. Now we're talking about getting attention from the investors. And there are, of course, many options at your disposal. This bulleted list, again, is not unique to the United States. A lot of these mechanisms and instruments are available all over the world, maybe in varying degrees of quantity and quality. I've bolded one in particular because I think this will be a little more actionable for you in this conversation. Government grants and incentives. You entering the market, you have all of these vehicles at your disposal. Government grants and incentives, particularly in this current business environment, there is a lot for you to tap into. This has been a period, the last few years has been a period of really aggressive investment on the part of government to stimulate the small business economy, to reward entrepreneurs for the risk that they're taking. And there are a number of major pieces of legislation, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. You'll hear it referred to as the IRA. That is, one of many pieces of legislation that has really smoothed the runway out in front of you. Now, if you're interested in exploring this free money that can be a game changer for your business, start with the U.S. Small Business Administration, because they curate a lot of these types of funding opportunities, not just for grants, but actually the whole list. Within the SBA, they also operate a program in partnership with academic institutions called the Small Business Development Centers, or SBDC. So virtually every major metropolitan area in the US has these SBDCs, which are effectively partnerships between local business and local academia to help stimulate the economy, to help give you access to resources that can grow your business. They have a vested interest in this, because if you succeed, you grow, you're contributing to the tax base, and you're hiring people to work for you. And this is a win for the local economy. If you're interested in a more specific search for grant funding opportunities, look at grants.gov as well as GrantWatch. And government grants are not the only type of funding that is out there. I would strongly urge you to consider private philanthropy as well. So Candid is a website. It's a company that has onboarded several brands, including Foundation Center and another one called GuideStar. Under the Candid umbrella, you can now basically get a very comprehensive search engine of philanthropic giving activity of grant funding opportunities through private organizations. And what's nice about Candid is that most public libraries actually have access to these resources and can save you the trouble of spending thousands of dollars on a license. So you can go to the Candid website, I believe it's candid.org, and they have a search engine there where you can actually look for the nearest library where you can access this information for free. You go there, you do it once, you download all the information you need, and then you have what you need, and it's truly a valuable resource. And then there's SCORE. SCORE is just one more set of resources similar to the SBA, but actually privately run. And SCORE is basically just a huge volunteer network. So a lot of the people that you're working with through WEVE and through Sella Innovation and the whole sort of family of brands, people like myself are volunteering to provide this kind of information and guidance. SCORE has these resources as well. Until you find that you have traction and you are comfortable in the US market, my advice to you would be take all the free help you can get. These are some examples. I mentioned we would talk about risk tolerance. Now, this is a big topic. It really covers a lot, and I don't want to try and address it in this conversation when it really deserves like its own presentation. But what I will say is that the best way to mitigate your opportunities from a risk management perspective, the best way to get inside the head of your investor and start to understand how they look at your business from a risk perspective is to simply educate yourself on what they've done in the past. So resources like PitchBook and AngelList will give you deal history. They'll help you understand sector preferences. And so when you approach a given investor, you have a sense of what is their appetite? What are the size rounds they like to get involved in? When in the process, what round do they prefer a pre-seed investment? Do they get involved later? Maybe they have a certain industry focus, a certain geographical focus. Some of them are getting very specific about more of the psychographic filters. For example, a lot of funds are now supporting female founders or minority founders. There are, funds that support founders who didn't go to university. Those are just some examples. Finally, the National Venture Capital Association, or NVCA, can also augment your research and give you some free resources to offset some of the cost of these other solutions. Okay, so that's the playing field. Now we've sort of turned the page and we're going to talk. We've got a little bit of comfort with the environment in which we're operating. Now we're going to go one level deeper and talk about what are the rules of engagement. And so a few ways to look at that. The first is within this regulatory environment, there is a lot to cover. I'm not going to pretend like we can cover every single detail in this conversation, but we'll cover some of it: legal, intellectual property, and tax. We'll also talk a little bit about due diligence. And I don't mean the due diligence that investors are doing on you. I'm talking about the due diligence you should be doing on them. It's a two-way street. In this culture, there is very much an expectation. It's the same thing that happens when a vendor and a customer are sizing each other up. It's a little bit of a dance. And you have to be comfortable with that investor as much as they need to be comfortable with you, because you're making an investment in them too. You're investing your IP, your time, your energy, your heart and soul that goes into this business. You choose that investor, and now they're along for the ride. You better be happy with who you've chosen. Finally, some investment terms. My guess is you're quite familiar with many of these. However, sometimes there is some linguistic difference to how things are referred to, and it's always helpful to be conversant in the terminology that your investors are going to be using. So let's dive in. The regulatory environment. So the main point I want to make here, and I am not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, but my advice to you as a business coach is to always think locally for your legal advice. For whatever counsel you engage, think about it not so much in terms of the United States, But you want to think about it, the state in which you're going to do business, the state which you're going to incorporate your US entity. Um, it might also apply to you in certain cities and certain metropolitan areas. Sometimes there are specific rules of engagement for those geographies as well. Everything from the type of entity that you set up, how you approach licensing and permitting for specific products. For example, in financial services, you've got a whole set of guidelines to work with. Labor and employment, if you're planning on hiring people, there are always going to be laws you have to follow, as well as when and how much tax you pay. Consumer protection, well, in the United States, it's typically been a little bit more of a laissez-faire environment compared to other parts of the world, especially Europe. The same is true for data privacy and security, but all of that's changing. And so really the important thing here is when you engage counsel to really think at the local level and look for that type of intelligence as you execute. A lot of places you could go for this type of information. Within a given state, you could look at the Secretary of State office, the Department of Revenue or Department of Commerce, and also the Department of Labor, specifically for some of those employment concerns. There are industry-specific or sector-specific entities as well. So the SIIA for software, the Financial Services Roundtable, if you're in the finance space. These are examples that you could look into, and there's certainly more than just what you see on the page. The last one I'll give you is Zen Business. If you're not familiar, they're not alone. There are a number of companies out there that offer very low-touch, portable services for small businesses. So think incorporate for a low price, get access to legal counsel for a low price. It's intended to stimulate the small business community where there are millions of business entities operating, thousands upon thousands being started every week. And Zen Business, I'm a customer. I'm a very satisfied customer of Zen Business. And I urge you to take a look if you ever need any support for any of the aforementioned. And I do not have a financial stake in Zen Business. I will be quick to add. Now, intellectual property. There is a lot of focus in the US on IP rights, and this represents an opportunity as well as a challenge. From the opportunity side, when you have true protection, you can now differentiate yourself in a big way. If what you do is in a crowded category with a dozen similar competitors or 100 competitors, but your IP protections give you a specific lock on a process, a way of doing it, a methodology, a particular positioning, even a tagline or some sort of a brand proposition. All of that represents the opportunity to distance yourself and to say, hey, we're just like them, but we're better in this way. And that also can lend itself to investor confidence. They want to see IP protection because they want to know that what makes you special is something that you can carry around with you wherever you go. And if they put money behind you, then they can carry that around with them. In many cases, this can also cross borders and lend itself to expansion potential. That said, there are challenges here. It can be expensive to protect IP in this country. IP lawyers are very skilled at doing everything we just talked about, but they don't work for free. And there is always the risk of infringement. And so I would urge you to always have peace of mind. Find a good patent attorney, find a good IP attorney, somebody who can really give you a crystal clear perspective on how protected are you when you're out there on the battlefield. The US Patent and Trademark Office is a good starting point just to understand the laws on a very general scale. Copyright.gov is a little more focused on trademark and patent and some of the protections. Between these two sites, you'll get a sense for what the basic rules of engagement are, and then you can fill in some of the blanks when you retain counsel. Finally, from a tax point of view, Again, this is a topic that is far too extensive to get into in any detail in this discussion, but I will point out you want to start by appreciating the difference between the federal tax environment across the United States, as well as the state in which you incorporate, because there will be differences. And some of these sites that we've already talked about can be good resources for it. I would also add that at the federal level, the Internal Revenue Service is a good starting point. It takes a strong stomach to navigate their website. They have a staggering amount of information, and so you really need to know what you're looking for. At a state level, whichever state you're in will have a website or some sort of knowledge base in the Department of Revenue where you can go for guidance. Suffice to say, just as with IP and other legal concerns, having a qualified tax specialist on your side is going to be very important. Okay, so with due diligence, again, I want to repeat, this is what you're thinking of when you approach your investors. I'm going to go through this quickly. There's a lot to cover here, but from expectation point of view, they're going to be looking at you for your growth pattern, your ability to scale, your ability to deliver a return. And effectively, you're looking at them for the same thing. Can they help you grow? Are they there to help you scale when you're experiencing some growing pains? Are they going to come in and give you advice, perspectives, access to relationships, other resources that can help you scale and navigate that process? And ultimately, they want a return on their capital. You want a return on everything you're putting into your business, which is not just capital, but it's your heart, your soul, your energy, your sleepless nights, all of that. Think about reputation. What are some of the investments they've made? Have they won? Have they lost? Always ask for references. It goes both ways. And so check those references, engage in real dialogue, and push those people to really, really dig for answers to your questions. If they're an investor that is clearly focused on a specific sector, then that ought to lend itself to deep relationships within that sector. So how are their industry contacts? And not only that, but do they possess the perspective on that particular sector to give you tailored strategic and operational guidance? Because navigating the world of healthcare is very different from navigating the world of packaged goods or financial services or software. The investment philosophy is important. This should be a question that any investor is prepared to answer. How do you look at your business? How do you choose the types of companies you invest in? What do you look for in founders? What do you look for in the business model? What do you look for in the pitch deck? And then, of course, the brass tacks. How do you structure these deals? What do you look at as the finish line? How do you approach your exit? And are you going to be with me through thick and thin, as Americans like to say? Because you want a partner who's going to stay with you in the ups and downs of your business. Governance, a few bullet points among many. The terms and conditions of the proposal. How much decision-making power are they going to try and retain in exchange for the investment they're making, and the liquidation preferences, both for them as well as for you. Finally, the network and support. Any good investor ought to be able to make a referral to a prospective customer, a prospective partner, or somebody qualified to fill a key role in your organization. For example, if you're coming from Singapore and your team is not fully built out, but you feel that maybe that founding CTO or that founding CMO ought to be based in the US for reasons that are totally your own. Start with your investors. See if they can make some recommendations for you. You're going to need all the contacts, all the qualified leads you can get. So the last thing here is investment terms. Now, I've gone out of my way not to answer these in this discussion. I did put a slide in the appendix where you can refer to the definitions for these terms if any are unfamiliar to you. My guess is you know probably all of these. but they might have different sort of linguistic. They might be referred to in different terms compared to what you're used to in Singapore. So this is the slide for now. We're not going to get into the details in the interest of time, but when we circulate the slides afterwards, you'll have access to that. Okay, we've covered two. We've got one left. I know I've been talking a lot, and I'm really eager to get into the questions, but I'll just push through this last segment real quick. Let's talk about the players. So when we talk about players, I'm referring to customers, I'm referring to investors, and I'm referring to the art of finding anyone and everyone who can move your business forward. And so let's just tackle these one by one. We'll start with customer segment profiling. Market research, you all know what it looks like. And I'm just going to introduce a very simple framework. As you expand into the US, think about it in terms of, on one hand, defining what you actually know, what you don't know, and trying to make order out of chaos. And then getting into actually testing and iterating, because the information you have today will never be complete. It will never be perfect. So starting with definition, I've listed a few bullet points here. These are actual processes that Mission Flywheel uses to establish exactly what we're talking about. So if you're entering a new market, you're launching a new product, you're trying to branch out into a new customer segment, these are scenarios that I come across frequently. The CRM roadmap is a way to say we start with technology. The CRM is the center of it's basically our brain. It's the brain of the company. And the data that passes through that CRM is not only for customer facing purposes, but it's going to inform product development, it's going to inform operations, it's going to inform finance, marketing programs, everything. And so it's very important to have a strategic view of how are we using the CRM? How can we make the best use of it? How will it scale and how can we grow with it? What sort of data can we bring in to make it more valuable? That sort of thing. Customer personas. Now, as we start to get a foothold in the United States, you're going to find that your deal cycle is very different. You're selling a software product. Maybe you expect the same buyer, but you might find that there are different influencers in the process. And whoever is responsible for procurement also has to collaborate with finance, with sales, with HR, whatever it might be. There are always going to be many opinions and many influences on that purchase decision. Sales cycles are getting longer. They're getting more complicated because buyers have more and more information at their fingertips. This is especially true in the verticals that you're competing in. And so understanding customer personas is a way of saying, these are the types of people we encounter throughout the process. This is what they value. This is the stuff that they object to. These are the things that they're going to say, they're going to use as reasons for why not to buy our product. We've got to be ready with a counter argument. We need specific marketing collateral for each of them. We need to be prepared. That's what the customer persona exercise does for them. The sales funnel audit also approaches that problem, but in a slightly different way. Instead of making it about the people, the sales funnel audit looks at the stages and the chronology. And it says, in the early days, when we start with a marketing qualified lead and the goal is to get a discovery call and ultimately a demo, we're going to work with them in a certain way. And we measure the data. We understand what are the friction points. And later on, when we get to objection handling from the demo and eventually moving into proposal phase, things are going to be different. And then later after that, when it's time to actually negotiate the contract, that's a whole other set of rules. The sales funnel audit is how we start to make sense of that, use data to our advantage. All of these can be built on the head start you've given yourself in your home headquarters market. And I've added a little bit of detail in the appendix to explain what we mean by this process, but it's a nice way to build on that progress that you've made. Once you've begun to do that, the testing and iterating is where things get interesting. A/B testing, launching an MVP, getting it out there and prototyping it. These are things that are very, very acceptable in the US business culture. People know that products are not going to be perfect. And if you can move fast and you have an agile environment, you'll be okay. We are very, very open. Investors are very open to the pilot method to establish a proof of concept. And so these are things that you should be thinking of as you plan your approach. Service excellence. This is a very, very important point, possibly the most important point I can make in this whole presentation. The American customer has a very, very high standard of customer service. Any American who goes to other countries where the standard is not as high typically has a very hard time adapting. I certainly will speak for myself, reflecting on being a student and waiting 45 minutes to get a drink at a bar and anywhere in Europe and thinking, God, this would never work in the US. American consumers can be ruthless if they have a bad service experience. They may love the product, but if they experience some pain in consuming it, they may never forget that. And that's important for you to remember. There's a lot of places you could go for perspective on the American consumer's standard of service. I recommend you read Tony Hsieh's book. The late founder of Zappos eventually became part of Amazon, and he wrote an amazing book about the mindset underlying delivering exceptional service. I highly recommend it. The last piece here for customer segments is local partnerships. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I did promise that I would give you resources wherever they were useful, and understanding your customer, bringing specific questions about the niche in which you do business. Some of these resources will come in handy for you. Okay, investor profiling and pitching. So we've talked a little bit about sector preferences. It's obviously very important to adapt to these, to understand the unique market dynamics that are in a particular industry vertical that you compete in, and to know the key decision makers. We have mentioned PitchBook earlier. I've also found Crunchbase to be very good for individual outreach. As far as I've found, Crunchbase is the very best for not just identifying companies, but then identifying decision makers within those companies. And it really works both ways. You as an entrepreneur, as a founder, are in that database, but you're also going to be thinking about it potentially in terms of your investors and your customers. Defining traction is a topic that, frankly, I'd love it if we had an investor, a VC, or someone from private equity on this call to give us their take on it. I'm just going to divide it into two categories. The objective definition of traction is really going to come down to, are you showing revenue growth quarter over quarter, year over year? Are you acquiring new customers? And are they within your ideal customer profile? Are you engaging users? So that could mean, are you driving monthly active users? Are you getting more loyalty? Are you simply building a stickier product? Those are some engagement metrics to think about. And of course, app and website analytics can give us a lot there. And finally, have you actually successfully delivered products or features within your product and objectively checked the box and said, we brought this to market? But I don't want to overlook some of the subjective indicators as well. Market validation. Are you accepted? Do you have partnerships where other entities have joined forces with you, signaling a vote of confidence in what you're doing? Has the industry recognized you, perhaps with an award or some sort of platform at a conference to tell your story? And earned media is a great one as well. Differently from launching ad campaigns to try and get your brand in front of people, earned media is, I think, a great external validation that you matter and that your business and your brand, your mission all matter, because you don't earn media if you don't matter. So finally, tailored pitches. I think you all appreciate the need to be very, very specific about the investor you're pitching and what the deck should look like. I'm not an expert on pitch decks. I won't pretend to be, What I will say is Americans value storytelling. After all, this is this is the culture that spawned Hollywood. This is a culture of a lot of a sort of myth in our history. We've created over the years, we've created a lot of mythology in this culture, and storytelling really lends itself to that. Make an emotional connection with your audience, even in the pitch deck. You talk about that, right? Tell a story. Maybe embellish on a case study or paint a picture of a solution that really matters. And failing all else, I absolutely love the pitch deck teardowns that you see on TechCrunch. And you'll see that they are done very much with an American lens. So the types of feedback that you see in these pitch deck teardowns, and they come in all shapes and sizes, you'll find they go from pre-seed to much later on. The pitch deck teardown will teach you a lot about what to expect when you go into those meetings. And I guarantee if you invest some time into it, you will anticipate problems before they happen. Okay, finally, relationship building. So I think you don't need me to tell you the value of building a network, but I will just leave you with some resources. Consider the Trade Show News Network and Events in America as good ways to get some exposure, specifically with trade associations. These are industry bodies that are committed to the business that you're in. It might be software, it might be IT and cloud, it might be insurance or banking, whatever it might be. This is a good place to look for opportunities for exposure. And of course, LinkedIn. Build your personal brand. Personal branding is a concept that doesn't always scale well globally, but in the United States, this is an area where you can build a real following for yourself on LinkedIn by simply being true to your mission, by articulating and re-articulating your value proposition, doing everything that it takes to get people interested and aligned and attached to what you're doing with your business. And then also feedback. This is something that also, is not always culturally as big a priority, but in the U.S., it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to show that you've taken some gambles and maybe missed. You've made some bets that didn't pan out. You've failed. What's important is that you show that you learn from those experiences. And when you ask for feedback, it's a gesture of humility in this culture that actually really counts for a lot. Ask for the feedback. Be open to it. Take it however it comes. Use various channels. So you can ask people that you trust face to face, but you can also use resources like SurveyMonkey to actually go and ask your customers questions about your business, your service, your processes, whatever it might be. When they give you that feedback, actively listen. Make sure you understand. Ask qualifying follow-up questions if necessary. Show them that you will take action. A lot of companies here in the US and globally will create customer advisory boards where they source this kind of feedback from their most valuable clientele, and then they turn around and they turn it into actionable next steps. And always, always show appreciation. Feedback truly is a gift. SurveyMonkey is one resource you can use when you have the audience. If you have those customers and you can reach them and they will respond to you. If you don't and you need to reach out to audiences blindly using more of a sort of panel mechanism, I suggest Pollfish. It's a really good way to get a lot large samples to respond to your questions in very, very short time periods, and it's quite cost effective as well. Okay, I've been talking for far too long. At this point, hopefully you feel that we've at least started to address some of these objectives. You'll never fully be an expert. I'm not. No one is. But hopefully this gets you on your way. And we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm happy to answer any questions that any folks might have.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for that. Quick question. In terms of patents and IP, Like what's the average cost for something like that if we were to look into it?
Well, when you say something like that, what can you help me understand more? Are you talking about the act of engaging legal counsel or protecting the patent? Help me understand.
I would say all of the above because something that we're looking into as we're expanding to the U or back in the US is definitely doing patent searches and the creation of patent and filing it in the US. The key thing that we're focused on right now is really just we're working with airports and shopping centers, and that's
Mhm.
something where we're starting to get traction back in the US and interest with additional airports. But we just want to be able to prepare. And I've also been getting a lot of asks from investors as well. They always ask that question: Do you have any IPs, any patents, etc.? And
Right.
sometimes it's sort of going to them with our tails in between our legs, saying, "Well, no, but this is something we're looking into." So I think just overall gist of approximately how much that will cost, especially if looking for a patent lawyer in the U.S.
Yeah. Okay. So the first step would be to actually get some daylight on your patent. You have to file it, and then it has to be examined by the USPTO. Um, Neither of those is a particularly heavy lift. If I had to guess, you're probably looking at maybe $1,000 for that. Um, there is a maintenance cost to protecting patents over the long term. That's something I can't speak to as much. But from a startup perspective, it's not terribly onerous. The patent attorney is a very different ballgame altogether. And truthfully, what they bill is almost immaterial because the question is, well, how much time is it going to take them to do everything that they're going to need to do for you? What I would tell you is I would work with, and some of this will depend on geography. Some of it will depend on the reputation of the firm that you engage. But I would prepare and budget for an hourly rate of somewhere between $500 and $750 US for patent protection. Again, big X factor being, can they just glance at it, give it a look over, and send you on your way, or are you getting into something stickier? So I
Mhm.
I realize it's at best a partial answer.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Hey Paul, it's Kelvin here. Just want to check with you. You were sharing about grants. Just want to check, are these grants open to foreign companies or do we have to incorporate before we are looking to take on the grant?
I want to make sure that the audio is a little choppy. So, Kelvin, I believe you're asking about grant funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm outside right now, so my internet might not be at best. Yeah, so just want to ask about grant funding. Is it open to foreign companies
No.
or do we have to set up a company, a local US company before we can look at the grant?
It will always be unique to the grant itself. More often than not, I think the grants um, that are worth going for are going to skew towards requiring U.S. incorporation. Um, Now, it's not to say that you can't sometimes partner your way into a grant funding opportunity. For example, you subcontract or you basically partner under the umbrella of a US based entity. And there are a number of ways to navigate that legally, operationally, to make it work. It would require, if you don't have a US entity, then you would have to lean heavily on alliances. And so if you have strong alliances, it sort of begs the question, why wouldn't you just have a US entity? But there are reasons. Um, this is not an area of very deep expertise for me, but I could tell you that a quick look at grants.gov, for example, if you started to set up some alerts and specifically filter for grants that look attractive to you, you'll quickly get a sense of it. My guess is for the types of companies that are on this call, more often than not, you're going to want a U.S. entity. Otherwise, the scope of what's available to you will be much narrower. And remember, a lot of this grant funding is coming from the U.S. government. The U.S. government, which has a strategic priority at the moment and largely throughout our past, of supporting American companies to be competitive, because we believe that our entrepreneurial machine is competitive on a global scale. And in doing so, American ingenuity is something that our sort of commercial engine is quite proud of. And so I would say it's probably a scenario where you certainly can do your research, but you're most likely going to find it's better to be incorporated here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Just quickly piggybacking off of what Kelvin just asked, is there what you've seen with startups like ours? What's the average size grant? Because I know in Singapore, it can go from about 100 to 500K Sing. But what about US?
So pardon my ignorance, but can you convert the Sing to US dollar for me?
Yeah, it's about I think it's what, $1 or 1.3 Sing. So it's about what, 80,000 to 400,000.
300 to 400. Yeah. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. I mean, the truth is, you can string together smaller grants at a local level. Grants where, for example, if you decided to set up shop in a mid-sized city, and you find that you actually can plug in very quickly to the entrepreneurial community there, and there's maybe some state money, maybe there's some local money, there might be some philanthropy around, you might find that actually your path to grant funding is more beneficial by getting 10,000 here and 30,000 there and stringing it together versus chasing a big six-figure check. That said, there are plenty of grants out there for companies like yours in the 80,000 to even up to 400,000 US. It just depends on what you're trying to do with it and how qualified you are.
Perfect. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Paul. A quick question on events. So I'm Alex here. Given that most of us are B2B, would you recommend Meetup as a useful tool to build our network?
So it's a good tool. I think it's a very good tool for grassroots networking. I don't recommend necessarily using Meetup for direct customer engagement. So what I'm saying is use it to collect information, insights, gather experience, observations, and certainly make good connections. But as a business development channel, it's a little bit crowded. And it's probably going to be full of people, like the people who go to Meetup to sell, I don't think are typically very successful. And they probably don't last very long because in communities, people don't want to be sold. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Sure.
Any last question? No, I think we're good. Thanks, Paul.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate the thoughtful questions and the opportunity to have this discussion with you. So by all means, I through the WEVE team, you can reach me if you ever want to follow up on any of this. And I wish you lots of luck. Very, very exciting what you're doing, and I'm a little bit jealous because you're going to have a fun time doing it. So thank you for staying with me for an hour and listening to me talk, and hope you got something good out of it.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much.